So hi everyone, it's Julia, and in today's video, we are going to be discussing Jennette McCurdy and her struggle with Hollywood and just her story with that. It's been so long, I've been wanting to talk about her and everything for such a long time, but now I'm finally ready to talk about it and I'm really excited, so let's get into it. So just some viewer discretion advised, as this video discusses eating disorders, trauma, alcoholism, and bereavement, aka grief, so please watch with caution and discretion. I also want to add that y'all need to stop begging Jennette to come back to iCarly or asking where is Sam. I don't know how many times she has to explain that she does not want to be on iCarly. Okay, I don't know how many times she has to explain that, but we're going to get into that in this video. So I'm just going to be giving some background on who Jennette McCurdy is. So Jennette McCurdy is a former child actress who was born on June 26, 1992 in Los Angeles, California, and she was raised in Garden Grove, California. So she's acted with a lot of small roles such as on CSI and Mad TV, and she's also acted in a ton of commercials, but what we really know her for is being in iCarly, Victorious, Sam and Cat, Zoe 101, all of her iconic Nickelodeon roles. She's also appeared in Between, which is a teen drama, and starred in her own web series called What's Next for Sarah. And Jennette was really beloved by many, including myself, for her great comedic timing, her acting skills in general, and she was really known for playing kid in peril roles really well, so playing roles where kids are literally in trouble. And I said this in my Allison Stoner video, I really don't like children playing roles like that because I feel like you're way too young to conceptualize that. You're literally going into a whole nother person. You're literally taking on a new persona, and it's a traumatizing persona because your character is going through trauma. And so I think that that's really dangerous for kids to play, even if they have someone to help them transition out of that. I don't care. Honestly, I don't think kids need to play those roles. I get that it's not as realistic, oh my gosh, who's gonna play these roles? How are we gonna have, they'll figure it out. I just don't feel like we need to have children play these kinds of roles. I just think they're really dangerous to the psyche, and I just think that they're just traumatizing. It's just not good. So basically, Jennette didn't enjoy acting as much as we loved watching her act. So I'm going to get into this with her struggles with her mother, eating disorders, and all those sorts of things. So when Jennette was about 3 years old, her mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and Debbie McCurdy went through tons of chemo, surgeries, and transplants. And during this time, Jennette found comfort in watching Star Wars with her brothers. And she cited that Harrison Ford was her little girl crush, and he was really brave and courageous. And she said that that's what she needed at the time. And so she said this when she was around 15 years old. And so this clearly affected her a lot during her upbringing, having to watch her mom go through cancer, go through this terrible, terrible disease that was basically sucking. She cited it as cancer was basically had a cage around her mother. And so she had to watch that a lot growing up. And so she used movies like Star Wars to cope. However, Jennette stated that she felt ashamed of about 90% of her resume, and she stated in her podcast Empty Inside that she was not proud of her acting and that she was in it because by age 10 or 11, she became the main financial support for her family.
What's your relationship with acting? Do you find it a refuge? Or is it ultimate exposure, when you're actually performing?
I quit a few years ago to try my hand at writing and directing. It's going great. I quit a few years ago because I initially didn't want to do it. My mom put me in it when I was 6, and by sort of age, I guess 10 or 11, I was the main financial support for my family, and it was very much just the pressure of my family didn't have a lot of money, and this was kind of the way out. Acting was difficult for me in the sense of the anxiety aspect. Going into auditions, I would pee 15 times. I get so stressed out, my heart would just pound. I'd get so clammy. Really, it was kind of a battle of nerves. And I think once I started to kind of get the nerves under control was when I started to actually get some traction. But I ultimately quit after my mom passed away because with her death kind of died a lot of her ideas for my life. And that was its own journey, and a difficult one for sure.
And I just feel like that isn't okay or fair for any child to deal with. I think all these kids who are in acting to support their families, and then some families are so evil to their children that they take their money, like Gary Coleman. Oh, the Gary Coleman story makes me so sad. Y'all let me know if you would like to see a video on Gary Coleman. I've always found Gary Coleman's story very, very sad, and there's a lot of crap to it, and there's a lot of craziness with his death. And so Let me know if you guys want to see that. Like, it's just so depressing. Like these parents literally make their kids little money makers because why? Maybe they didn't get the career they wanted. Maybe they wanted to be in Hollywood and they're living vicariously through their kid. Maybe they just didn't have the ability to provide for their children. But I just think it's so sad that you literally are making your child, your kid, the breadwinner. That's something that you should be ashamed of. I feel like parents need to be ashamed. Like, if your child is the breadwinner, what does that say about you as a person, as an adult? That's sad. I want to add that I get that when you're in Hollywood, especially as a kid, you're going to be making a lot of money, but the parents that pressure their kids, like Raven Simone's parents asked her, like, okay, what are you going to do now that, I think it was like when the Cosby Show ended, they were like, what are you going to do now? Because you need to pay bills and stuff. Again, when you have parents that put pressure on their kids to make money for the house, that's not right. It's one thing if your kid is making money because that's just what they're doing, but you shouldn't be putting pressure on them to be making money. Like, that's ridiculous. They're not a mule. So Jennette confessed that after her mom passed away in 2013, a lot of her mom's ideas for her life died with her. And so she quit acting shortly after. So her mother was a big reason why she was in the industry. And so basically, once her mother died, Jennette, I guess, felt free. You know, she felt like she could finally embrace what she wanted to do. She could finally find herself and realize, okay, what do I want to do? What do I want my life to look like now that I don't have my mom hanging over my head? And I think that's just very dark, and that has to be extremely conflicting, because Jennette even said herself that she was very, conflicted upon her mother's death, and that she turned to alcoholism to cope with the death. And she ended up making a one-woman show called I'm Glad My Mom Died. And on her website, she speaks that this was actually one of the best things that happened to her. It was one of the worst things at first, but then it turned into one of the best. And so that's extremely conflicting to go through, because it's like, you loved your mom, you hated seeing her suffer every day, but her dying allowed you to be free. I mean, wow, like, that's a lot to cope with. I myself have lost my mom, and my mom and I's relationship was completely different than Jennette and her mother's relationship. But for me, I couldn't imagine saying that I'm glad my mom died. But again, my mom didn't force me into a crazy industry. My mom didn't do any of that. My mom, like, took good care of me, and we had a great relationship. So I just, maybe I feel like I totally get where she's coming from, but I guess it's just weird for me to hear, because I've also lost a parent. I've also lost a mother. So it was definitely weird for me to read that, but I totally get where she's coming from. So Jennette McCurdy revealed in 2019 that she suffered from anorexia and disordered eating, and she recognized that in order to get more roles, she had to be small, and she cited that her mom aided in this by counting her calories and questioning her diet choices. So she was very anorexic from a really young age. I mean, as young as like 12 years old, she talks about experiences of not really eating her food. And she even said that when she was about 12 years old, she was coming back from dance class, and her mother told her that some of the other mothers at the dance studio were getting concerned about her because they felt like she was getting too thin. And so Jennette's mother told her to tell her friends and their parents just like, oh, I'm eating fine, everything's fine. So that is very conflicting. And Jennette's mother herself was hospitalized for anorexia when she was young. And so I think this could be a habit that has passed on from mother to daughter in the family. And so that's extremely conflicting and really sad to hear. And Jennette slowly moved into bulimia, and these practices were due to comments she'd hear from stylists commenting that she lost weight, or her agent telling her she never looked better. And so she found bulimia really enticing, because it's like, I can eat and then throw it up and not have to gain weight. And so she found that extremely enticing. But then over the years, she saw how it was deteriorating her. I mean, her teeth were literally just stained from throwing up constantly. And so she saw herself deteriorating and spiraling. And then she had a family member who actually recognized that things were not going well, and she encouraged her to get help. And so through this, she was able to get help. She was able to go through a lot of therapy to help rectify a lot of things that she was going through and a lot of her habits, and help encourage her to go on a healthier lifestyle, mentally, physically, spiritually. So that is really amazing. And I'm so happy that she came out of that. That's just so admirable. And I love how Jennette is open with it, because she wants to encourage other people that, you know what, you don't have to be a slave to this. You can be better. Things can get better. You can learn positive body image and how to take care of yourself properly. Like, these things are possible. And so I'm very happy, and I'm very proud of her for being so brave. I did find it really interesting what she said about the eating disorder in young Hollywood, about how it was almost like a competition. And so she said that it was like an eating disorder hierarchy. And so she felt like she competed with people regarding her eating disorder, and she felt like she wasn't as good at her eating disorder. Like she literally felt like she was not as good at having an eating disorder than other girls. Which is really sick. The fact that Hollywood, again, encourages that. Like, you encourage young girls to feel competitive over eating disorders? That's just gross to me. So yes, Jennette's eating disorder struggles really trouble me, especially knowing that Jennette played Sam, a girl who loved and was obsessed with all kinds of food. And so she cited that, you know what, like, this is something that was very, obvious to me. This is something I was clearly struggling with when I was on iCarly. And yet and still, producer Dan Schneider made her play a character where she was in love with food. So I want to add that I don't think we can know for sure if Dan Schneider knew of Jennette's struggles with eating and her eating disorder. I feel like I haven't found anything that like concretely said like, yes, he knew and he made Jennette play Sam. Like, we can't correlate that because there's just no evidence, but just based off of Jennette's like Vine that she did of Dan and all of these complaints from so many different people over the years, I think it's safe to say that it wouldn't surprise me, or I wouldn't put it past him, because he just seems like a really bad person. So yeah. I wanted to add that Jennette McCurdy went on the Michaela Peterson podcast in December of last year, and she said that she worked with an emotionally producer when she was around 13 years old that basically said that if it wasn't for him, then her and all of her co-stars would be working at Yogurtland. And she described him as villainous and mustache twirling. So a lot of people put two and two together and they're like, she's most likely speaking on Dan. So just awful, disgusting.
Great, and then stop with more.
Stop laughing at the director. Show some respect, Jennette. Respect. No smiling. All right. Take $100 off her check.
And so I can't imagine the dichotomy and the confusion you have to go through as a young kid playing a role like that when you have trouble with food, but yet and still you have to act like you love food all the time. I mean, that's so chaotic. So chaotic. So next I want to discuss basically Jennette's kind of disdain for iCarly and Sam and Cat. And basically, Jennette said that she felt her greatest contribution to society was walking onto an overlit Nickelodeon set, shouting lines about fried chicken, and that she resented her success from playing Sam and found her character to be shallow. Didn't really like her character. I'm guessing she found it very cheesy to be on an overlit set, and then all I'm doing is yelling about fried chicken. What else have I done for the world except say that? She said in April of 2020 that she still has complicated feelings towards her past experience on Nickelodeon, and that it's something she'd like to work on. And she also said, I'd like to get to a place of peace with my past. That would be great. And so I think Jennette is still currently working through and rectifying her experience as an iCarly star, as a Nickelodeon star. There was a lot of drama that went down, especially during Sam and Cat, which I'm going to get into. But basically, Jennette went through a lot on Nickelodeon with her eating disorder, with just the way her mother was pushing her into the career, the way that she just had to deal with so many different demons and struggles. And I think it's just, honestly, I don't blame her for having such a conflicted mindset on her Nickelodeon days. I don't blame her for being so conflicted. I feel like we all have things that we've had to experience in the past that we've moved on from, but we're obviously still very conflicted by it. We still are very hurt by it. And I honestly think that I'm glad that she's taking the steps, going to therapy and working through this confusion, working through these conflicting feelings, because it has to be very conflicting. I mean, it has to be really difficult knowing that you were on this crazy, overlit, cheesy set acting like a crazy, like it's like we loved it, but it's like you're also getting older and then you have to act like this, and then you have to play a character that loves food, but you have so many issues with food. And so it has to be just so much to unpack in your mind. Like, I can't imagine. And I've definitely had things in my life that I've had to unpack, and it's exhausting. So yeah, I fully support her in her journey, and I'm so happy she's not going back to the iCarly reboot, because even if the iCarly reboot is changing and it's going to be different than the original show, it's still going to be too much of a reminder. So I totally empathize with her. So Jennette had issues with her role as Sam in Sam and Cat, where she had issues with Nickelodeon paying Ariana Grande more than her, and this caused her to boycott the KCAs in 2014. And so basically Jennette did not feel like this was fair, that she was getting paid much less for a job that her and Ariana are both doing. That's just not fair, and they're both very talented women, and so she definitely wanted to go and do what was fair and do what was right, and she went on Twitter and said this. And I actually found like a old article from ABC News, and some of the comments, some people were just really cruel to Jennette in these comments. Like, they were just saying all bunch of things about how she's like, basically she's washed up and all these other things, and so people were really I didn't realize how cruel people were to Jennette back in 2014. I didn't even realize that people, I guess the general public, wanted to hate on her. I didn't realize that, but it's crazy. Okay, I want to correct myself real quick. I don't think people really hated on Jennette back in 2015, 2014. I think those were just a couple salty comments. But yeah, that was just some criticism that I didn't realize she was getting. So I wanted to discuss Jennette's current endeavors, and Jennette has directed and written several short films such as Kenny, which was featured on The Hollywood Reporter and was inspired by the death of her mom. And she's also wrote and directed other short films such as The Grave, The McCurdys, which is a short semi-autobiographical film of her life. So it's about a dysfunctional Mormon family that grew up with a mom with cancer. And so this video is extremely telling because in this video, I watched it a while back. I've watched it a few times. And the fact that she's, of course, playing a character who had been, like, she's playing a character who had gone through that. And basically, she is literally crying and all this stuff. And then you have one of her brothers who's kind of looking at her like, that seemed a little too real. Like, that seemed way too real. And so Jennette was young, I think, at the time when she was on CSI. So I think that's very, again, really sad. You know, something I wanted to say is it really bothers me how a lot of these producers in Hollywood and Nickelodeon are not getting their just desserts. I mean, we had this whole Me Too movement, but what about so many other people who still need to be Me Too'd? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, I remember like thinking that this kind of stuff in Hollywood was not that common. Or it was common, but like I didn't think it was so rampant. Like, it's literally so much more common than we ever thought. And it just makes you wonder, like, why aren't these people being questioned? Why aren't these people being investigated? But they're just so powerful. They're so powerful. And I just hope that, you know, whatever Jennette went through or whoever did XYZ to her, as she insinuated in her film, I hope that it comes to light one day. So as I stated before, she starred in her own show titled I'm Glad My Mom Died, which Jennette again described as being one of the worst things that happened to her to one of the best. And this was put on hold because of COVID. And so she performed a few shows, I think in Los Angeles and New York, but it's been on hold because of COVID. So I'm assuming that once COVID clears up even more, we're kind of getting out of COVID a bit. Once we really get out of it, I'm assuming that's when she's going to pick it up again. And so Jennette is now heavily focused on her podcast that premiered last year entitled Empty Inside. She discusses comedy, trauma, therapy on the podcast and uploads them to her YouTube channel. So I catch her clips every now and then if it's on my homepage, and I'll listen to a few minutes. I also wanted to mention that Jennette McCurdy also was raised Mormon, and Jennette has a lot of conflicting viewpoints on how she was raised because she felt like her mom only went to church when she needed help. And this is something that I hear a lot. Just to offer my perspective as a Christian, this is something you hear of a lot. You know, a lot of people sometimes will go to church when there's a problem, then we go to God. And I just want to say again that being a Christian is not about religion, it's about relationship. It's about having relationship with Jesus Christ, with the Father, with God. It's about relationship. It's about having someone that you can go to whenever you're struggling, but also someone to go to when things are going well. You know, that's the whole point of like having a relationship with God, is it's really just a personal connection. And so Jennette had a lot of conflicting feelings with the way she was brought up in the church and things like that. And so I hope that, you know, one day maybe that can again be rectified for her, find God for herself, and know that this is about a personal relationship. It's not about religion. It's not about having to go to church and having to do X, Y, Z and this and that. If whatever we do, like as a Christian, if you do something like, if like, for example, going to church or participating in this or doing this, it's out of love and out of obedience. It's not out of, I have to do this. So I just think that's was a very interesting point that I wanted to bring up. And yeah, so basically Jennette McCurdy, her life is just very, really, so much has gone on with her. Her life is very, I think she's done so well for herself. She's really made a way for herself, and she's a very poignant writer. She's a very strong person and very opinionated. And I think she really needs to give herself a pat on the back, because what she went through wasn't easy. And when you're thrown through the ringer like that, like in Hollywood, it's not going to be easy for you to just come out of it. And so I'm really grateful that she's doing what's best for herself. She's taking good care of her mental health. And I hope that she gets nothing but the best. And I hope she truly can heal and rectify her past. She's just she seems like a very great person, a very sweet person. And she seems very regular. Like, it's interesting. Like, she seems extremely, extremely regular. Like, yo, this Hollywood thing was just never my thing. Like, I was just thrown into it. And so again, I really hope that she can find peace and be rectified of everything she went through. And so I thank you all for watching this video. That's just kind of my rundown of things that have gone on with Jennette in Hollywood. I hope you enjoyed it. Please comment below things that you want to see me talk about in the future, and also subscribe to my channel, like this video, and I'll talk to you guys soon. All right, peace.